we ran the Sean Ellis product market fit survey, and we had actually a massive vocal majority of customers who hated us, like absolutely hated us. And weirdly enough, those are the customers we went after. Because when we spoke to them, the reason they hated us was because they said, hey, I found this really cool product on your app, and why can't you deliver it to me? And in hindsight, it really was that obvious that we just weren't spending enough time listening to our customers. So we actually focused on our detractors. We went after those guys, and we actually built a more traditional marketplace. There's a real lesson there in how you don't really realize you don't have product market fit until you do.
Today's guest is Mandeep Singh, who has many incredible achievements and positions. He was one of the co-founders of Trouva, which exited, and was one of the fastest growing companies in the early days of the tech boom in London. He's an international board member for Amnesty International. He's a venture partner at Hoxton Ventures. He's personally angel invested in dozens of companies. Mandeep is a huge part of the tech ecosystem in the UK, and is one of those early pioneers who created the companies that's inspired so many others. You're also going to hear his story, because this is not conventional. He was a bit of a rebel. He's done so many different things growing up, and you can see that mentality they had from that young age and how that took him to different places and where he is today. So I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. I'm Amma from the Pay HQ, and this podcast is powered by HSBC Innovation Banking. So great to have you on today, Mandeep, and really excited to see all the different stuff you've done. But if you rewind back to when you were growing up, what did you want to be? What was your childhood like in terms of your ambitions?
Yeah, so I guess not to be too much of an Asian stereotype, but my parents wanted me to be a doctor, sorry. And I was a pretty geeky kid, so I was quite into my physics. So I think I wanted to be a particle physicist, actually, weirdly, when I was a teenager. And then that's why I went off to study, actually, yeah.
So was when you went to go and study then? Where did you go to study, and what was that like? Was it what you hoped it would be when you studied with physics?
Yeah, so I grew up in, home was Preston, went to school in Blackburn, and thought, right, I need to get away. So luckily got into Cambridge to do physics or natural sciences. And I think I was definitely the best physicist at school, not blowing my own ego too much. And I was probably the worst physicist at Cambridge, right? And it was a real shock. So I think it took me about 3 weeks to realize, hang on, there's no way in hell I'm like clever enough to go be like a particle physicist. So I guess it wasn't what I cracked up to be, but like I was totally convinced until then that that's what I wanted to do.
How was that adjustment? Because obviously if you think in your head, okay, you're obviously at school, you're the top person, like everybody's looking at your scores and you're the teacher's pet in some ways, I guess, if you're getting all top marks, to then having this identity shift that actually maybe I'm not as good as I think I am.
Yeah, I think I was never teacher's pet because I always like messed around with other stuff. So I was actually building a web design business when I was 14. So I kind of like, I guess I always like did the minimum I needed. Mm-hmm. And so I remember in sixth form I was off doing the business and then hanging out with mates. So I never really turned up to classes. And I guess you can get away with that, right, when you're at school. And suddenly, and then I took a gap year as well and worked for that. So I hadn't really studied for like 2 years before I went to university. Mm-hmm. And I remember our supervisor in the first tutorial, he asked everyone in the class what grade we were hoping to get. And everyone put their hand up saying first, right? I mean, who doesn't, right? When you're at school, who doesn't want to get an A? Yeah. I remember thinking, what a bonkers question, right? And then actually after a month or two, I got it, right? For the first time in my life, you realize, oh, hang on, like you can't just do the minimum, right? And get the best score. So I think that was a bit of a shock to me, but maybe this is easy to say in hindsight. I guess I was always kind of the person who wanted to do other things, not just study. And in an environment where like people, I remember like walking past the library at like 2 a.m. when I was like very drunk on a Friday night, and there were people working, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's, I guess that was the shock, right? The culture shock was like, there are trade-offs, right? You can't be the best at everything, right? You can't get away with like, not doing your work. And I think that's still something I grapple with, actually. Yeah.
So you said about the web design agency there as well that you did when you were younger. Did you keep that up, or what made you start it and then think, I'm guessing you monetized that and you were making money on the side there?
Yeah, and I guess again, once you a proper entrepreneur, I guess you look back in your like childhood and realize you did these weird things. So I was always like doing like dodgy things on the side. So like I started like a primary school. I started a magazine which I flogged to like mates. Then
were you just printing it off at home?
Yeah, we'd do like crosswords and stuff, and then I managed to get them in my dad's work, get them photocopied, and then flog them. And then I calculated, well, we're making a loss, so I just wasn't paying for the photocopiers. And then I guess when I was 12, me and a mate invested in a CD copier and started copying CDs and flogging those to mates at school. And then I was I was lucky that my parents got me a computer and so I got online in 96 when I was like 12, 13. I had a 14.4K modem. So I was just started building websites, right? So doing a bunch of front end codes and pretty simple stuff. And then I realized like people who were mates of my dad were like, oh, you can build a website. Like, what if I gave you some money to go build this? And we're like, yeah, hell yeah, right? Yeah. So it became like a business over time, right? Just because we could make money from it, right? Yeah, I still remember getting the first check when we got paid. It was $1,000, and it was split between three of us. I remember queuing in HSBC to get like to cash a check, and we insisted on taking it out in cash. And 333 quid when you're like 14 and like the 90s is like, it seems like all the money in the world. So yeah, so that's why I started doing it. And then I carried it on until I got to university. And then when I got to Cambridge, weirdly enough, I was told I had to immediately shut it down because like you're not allowed to have a job when you're at Cambridge alongside your work. So like entrepreneurship was like not encouraged.
When you say not allowed, it's like, how would they find out in some ways?
Yeah, so if I was less naive, I could have just like not told them, right? But I think I mentioned it to the director of computer science, right? Because I thought it would be like interesting. I've been coding for like 4 years, and he wasn't very happy, basically. Yeah, I think that's culture's changed a bit now, but
it's interesting, right? Because now you'd think like that would be encouraged, or well, actually, I don't know, but.
Yeah, I still don't think it's great. And it's and one of the things, I'm actually going to the Valley next week, and like one of the reasons I love being in the Valley, right, is like the ecosystem around Stanford, right, where these things are encouraged. Now, arguably, there's probably more people going into entrepreneurship than going into research, right, which is obviously super valuable. But there's definitely, and I think it's still there, there's definitely a culture at British universities, certainly at Cambridge, of like, research is what you should do if you're really smart, right? Going off to do something else, right, is not that valued, right? And so your assessment is on your grades, right, not on what other things you're doing. So I don't think entrepreneurship is respected in the same way in the UK as it is in the US.
So when you were at university, I guess you knew that you didn't want to become a particle physicist, and were you thinking, I want to go down the entrepreneurship route at that point? And knowing that almost did that affect your mindset around what you would do in the future when you're hearing or getting this vibe from people that maybe actually I should be doing research because that's respectable, whereas me going and doing my own thing isn't looked at the same way?
Yeah, it was pretty clear to me that I wasn't going to go be a researcher. I just wasn't. I didn't care that much about it, right? And I wasn't as smart as the people who were like who could do triple integrations in their heads, right? And so, but actually, it would have made this story would make a lot more sense if I then went to be an entrepreneur. But I guess, bearing in mind it was like 2003 in Cambridge, where like, you know, I was actually told to stop coding. I guess I did what most people do, which is go, I have no idea what to do, so I'll go do some generic corporate career, right? So that's what I ended up doing. And to be fair, when I was running the web design business, I actually did start to do less and less coding and more I enjoyed like selling to clients. I enjoyed like the finances bit of it. So I just started thinking about like a general career in business, basically.
And then, so you started off in consulting, right?
That's right, yeah. So I did an internship in strategy consultancy, joined as a graduate, like nice, comfortable kind of job to do, especially at the time. I did that for a couple of years. Then I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but most of the people who left consultancy at the time, it was just after the financial crash. So I was there 2007 to 2010. You know, most of the people who were there, at least pre-crash, like the ones who seemed to be like the top rated all went to be investors. So I was like, right, I'll go join a private equity fund because that's what everyone does, right? Yeah, and so I did private equity for the next couple of years.
And how did you find private equity compared to consulting? Which do you think you enjoyed more?
So private equity was like great fun because you kind of are the client, right? And it kind of is the stereo, like it was a leveraged buyout fund, so it's $20 billion fund. So we're buying like companies typically like billion to 10 billion in value. And there was kind of a stereotype of like a kid in the 20s, like sitting on the board of like these companies, when I didn't have a goddamn clue what I was doing, right? So it was a complete farce, right? But it's pretty good fun, right? You know, I remember my old boss from OC&C, he was now head of media at BCG, and he came to like, he was like bugging me to catch up, and he came to pitch me. And I'd be lying if my ego wasn't like, this is awesome, right? You know, like the partners are now pitching me, right? And isn't this fun? So the status and money is really fun, right? The hours were mental, totally mental. And it was only after like a few years that I started to think like, what am I actually doing, right? Like I sat on the board, I was a board observer at Foxtons, the real estate agency. And I only got that board observer seat because it was the smallest business in the portfolio. And I remember turning up to the board meetings and just what like the business was doing great. Like CEO would take me for a tour around Foxtons. And I remember thinking at one point, right, wow, if I got hit by a bus, there's like 1,000 other kids from like banking or consulting to come take my job, right? Like from Russell Group unis or whatever. But if this guy got hit by a bus, right, we'd be screwed, right? I couldn't do his job, right? Yeah. So I became more and more like envious of like the people who'd founded these businesses, right? And the operators. That made me quite unusual. Most people in private equity just love being the deal maker, right? So I really enjoyed the job, but like I just started to think like, hang on, like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life?
And how did you start coming up with ideas of what you could do in your own business?
So obviously classic like YC thinking, and this is still the right thing to do, is to think about a problem that you care about and you want to solve. The problem when you're working in like a really narrow and, you know, pretty well paid field like private equity is that the problems you see are not so different, like, are very different to everyone else, right?
Yeah.
So you get a lot of private equity or ex-consultants like building, you know, solutions for consultants and private equity guys. So I didn't do that, but I actually did the opposite of what you're supposed to do, which was a friend and I, a friend who was working in P with me, I think we were up at 3 a.m. doing some large but totally like boring deal, and we both had this like slight epiphany on what are we doing here. So we talked ourselves into quitting first. We basically agreed that like if he quit, I'd quit with him, and we had a few ideas, but we didn't actually know what we were going to do.
How is that, like your friends and family, when you made that decision to quit without knowing what you're going to do? How is that reaction around you?
So I wasn't a doctor, so my parents long since didn't really care what I was doing. I'm paraphrasing, but not by much, right? It's kind of true. I think Mum thought I was an accountant or something. So anyway, but then I had to explain I didn't have an accountancy qualification, so she was very disappointed in me. So I think it wasn't so much family, but like everyone in the fund thought we were totally insane. Like I remember like Maxime, my original co-founder, he was like the top rank guy in the funds, and he was essentially on partner track. And one of the partners came over to him and was like, I have like 1,000 kids from like Goldman's and McKinsey like knocking my door down for your job, right? Now you're in, why are you quitting, right? So it was just like a kind of, and again, it was 2012. Not many people had gone to do startups, right? And it was kind of like, once you're in, no one kind of leaves, right? It was kind of a job people aspired to, I guess. So everyone thought we were nuts. I guess we thought we were nuts because we didn't have an idea. But candidly, the reason we did that is because we thought we need the fear. Like if we have the fear, then like we'll pick an idea, right? Yeah. If we sit here, we're working too long hours and getting paid well enough that it would just be too easy to sit around.
So obviously, once you've now quit your job and you're now looking at different ideas, you're looking at different problems. How did you pick the problem that you eventually went for?
So we had a couple of ideas working ourselves. For example, like Maxim was Swedish, so he was looking at so HelloFresh is a copy of a Swedish business called like Linn Asbag, something like that. So he thought like, oh, we should do that in the UK, and I thought it was the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And that was HelloFresh, a $10 billion business. So
yeah,
first thing, it shows like your criteria of what you think a good problem is or not is very subjective. And then we also started looking at what was going on in the US, which is a slight cheat, but we were like, okay, well, what's going on in the Valley? And we saw that a few people in the Valley, well, Square was doing really well and was just starting in the Valley and doing obviously credit card payments on mobile. No one was doing that in Europe yet, and that was because of chip and pin. So iZettle were in stealth, so we heard about it then. But we started looking in that kind of area. And so there were a bunch of businesses in the US doing point of sale software on iPads. So essentially, if you're running a retailer, you kind of track your stock, like you actually see what's sold, you synchronize your inventory with the website. And it was going to be, and they were essentially building software on iPads rather than having old school barcode point of sale systems. So that was the space we started looking at. And honestly, how we did it, we picked about 5 or 10. We did a lot of like lean and dirty things. We tested them, right?
Yeah.
We built like fake versions of websites, ran like AdWords campaigns, looked at like performance. We kind of built fake versions of point of sale software, pounded the streets and tried to sell it to a bunch of independent retailers and claimed we'd built it. So we did like, yeah, I guess going back to my childhood, right? I always did a bit of like slightly edgy things, right? But this is like YC kind of SF, like school of thought, right? Just being lean and dirty.
So one interesting thing as well, so obviously you started the company originally with somebody who was doing a similar job to you.
Right.
And when you think about obviously you don't have the tech background. Well, I guess you did do the tech coding earlier, but you're both kind of in the finance more background and the investment side. So the overlap of skills there, how are you thinking about how you're going to manage your different roles at this point as well? Because obviously if you're both similar jobs, I'm guessing there's some level of similar skill sets too.
So it's a really good question, and I didn't quite realize it until Maxim left quite early in the journey. Because you're right, initially I thought, right, hey, I used to code, it'll be fine, I'll do the tech. Realized I hadn't coded in a few years, and that's an eternity, right, in development, right? So we did end up finding a third co-founder who joined out of Entrepreneur First One. He's a like half German, half Cypriot guy, Alex, and he was like a deeply technical guy. So when we had the three of us, you might have thought that Maxim and I were, more, I guess I was relatively technical for a commercial founder, and Alex was very commercial for a technical founder. But this is where people get it wrong by looking at your backgrounds, because actually your personality type is more important. And one thing I realized over time is that Maxim was like a great COO type. Like he loved doing stuff in the background. He hated like going to talk to investors, right? He was kind of enjoyed the finance side of things, right? I enjoyed the selling. I enjoyed talking to customers. I enjoyed thinking like doing product, right? I like the ideation strategy more, right? He definitely liked doing like ran the sales team, right? He was great with people, much better with people than me. So we actually were a very complementary team. When Maxim quit a few years later, I remember the investors weren't that bothered because they were like, oh, you two are from similar backgrounds. And I think they didn't quite realize how value add he was to the company, because you can't, from outside in, you look at CV. You don't actually think, oh, hang on, like what are your strengths and weaknesses? What's your personality type? What are you doing under the hood of the business?
So I think we'll come back to that later on with about investment as well, because it's quite interesting when you think about when people are analyzing pitch decks and things like that, they are basically using what the people's jobs were beforehand to try and ascertain like what that is as well. So you've started the company. When did you start to set on like Trouva as the main idea that you're going to work on?
So it's now 2013. We've chosen initially to pursue this point of sale software for independent retailers. But when a mate of mine who worked with OCC, he'd gone through YC with his business. So he was like helping me out a bit on this lean startup. When we'd faked this point of sale software and gone to speak to these independent retailers, we realized, oh, hang on, like you're solving a problem that made a lot of sense as an investor, right? It made a lot of sense as an ex-consultant, that traditional point of sale systems are going to be displaced by SaaS, right? That inventory data is going to have to be managed in the cloud, that independent retailers would need to use live inventory data from their store to power their website. That was like, I remember pitching this to independent retailers and they were like, what the hell are you talking about, right? I've got a website and I get like 5 sales. I was like, okay, 5 sales a week or 5 sales a year? They're like, no, like 5 sales ever.
Yeah.
So cut a long story short, it turns out their problem was lack of sales. So we kind of, I wouldn't say pivoted, but we changed the idea into building a marketplace for these cool independent retailers, which curated beautiful products like beautiful homewares, beautiful fashion you couldn't find anywhere else in the world, and put them on a consumer marketplace with the point of sale software in the background. It became a essentially SaaS-enabled marketplace. Having said that, the marketplace we initially looked at was not Trouva. What we settled on initially was this mobile app called Street Hub, where you could pull out your phone, download the Street Hub app. It would show you all the cool products around you in independent stores. You could pay on your phone and go pick it up instantly, or you could get a 10-minute delivery or half an hour delivery from the store to your home. So in 2013, we'd settled on this business called Street Hub, and we went to raise for that. And Trouva didn't actually happen until 2015, 2 years later.
We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We just want to give a quick shout out to our headline partners, HSBC Innovation Banking. One of the biggest challenges for so many startups is finding the right bank to support them. Because you might start off and try to use a traditional bank, but they don't understand what you're doing. You're just talking to an AI assistant, or you're talking to somebody who doesn't really understand what it is you've been trying to do. HSBC have got the team that are built out over years to make sure they understand what you're doing. They've got the deep sector expertise, and they can help connect you with the right people to make your dreams come true. So if you want to learn more, check out hsbcinnovationbanking.com. What's interesting is I think about private equity. So like Foxtons was the smallest company in that portfolio. So obviously in that space, the decision making is probably a lot slower, a lot more red tape and bureaucratic. Whereas what you're doing here, you're changing your ideas quite significantly, quite often. How did you find that adjustment to go from that large scale business, which obviously, like I said, because they've got a lot more mature, they're generally doing pretty well. Right. They might make a few changes, but it's not going to be, okay, now we're just going to scrap this and completely change to another thing. How is that mindset shift for you there?
It's a really good question. And I think it comes back a little bit to, I was quite an unusual consultant and private equity person, right? Like I say, I was kind of, whilst I was at university, I kind of didn't have the patience for the research, right? I like things in the real world. I wanted to move quickly. I was, maybe going back to that school days, I would kind of look for like the minimum way, right, to get the desired outcome. And I think those personality traits like held me in very good stead for being an entrepreneur. And a lot of ex-consultant and private equity and hedgy types make terrible entrepreneurs, right? Because their CV might look good and they're very smart, but they can't do like lean, dirty things in the real world. It's often why like those from like a typical uneducational background make people who haven't gone to university make great entrepreneurs. Yeah. So I think it was very different to what I was doing, but I think it was my personality type to think that way. So that's probably why it didn't feel like such a shock. But also I spent a lot of time with other entrepreneurs and just kind of picked this up right over time, and probably still should have moved quicker than we did. Right.
So what made you settle from Street Hubs to Trouva? What triggered that change?
So we went out to raise money for Street Hub in 2013. We were building an MVP in the background. We'd built a very, very simple 2-week version of I won't call it point of sale software, but inventory management software for the retailers. We hadn't built a mobile app yet, but we built like a front end website in 2 weeks. And again, this is where having a technical co-founder was helpful, right? To get a very, very long story short, we somehow ended up with this massively oversubscribed round led by Index Ventures, who Europe's biggest venture capital funds, and they had invested in like Farfetch and Etsy and Dropbox and you name it, right? So, but certainly every marketplace we admired, right, and Just Eat as well. So we kind of ended up raising like $1.2 million on a pre-seed round when we were looking to raise quite a bit less. And almost that became like a bad thing because we'd raise money to go build this mobile app and go get it out there. We hadn't actually gone and figured out if that was going to be like a really good idea or not. So money almost slowed us down in a weird way because then we started hiring a big team. It was also like, it was a cool concept, right? It was there was a lot of noise around the time about like helping the high street, and it still is, right? But I remember I got invited by like BBC to talk on BBC One Breakfast News about the future of retail, and like so I was on TV in front of 7 million people warbling on about the future of the high street and Street Hub, right? Yeah. The funding round was a big funding round for the Times that was announced everywhere. So we were like, I thought like we had made it, and in hindsight, they were all bullshit metrics, right? Funding is like is a means to an end, right? Like the ideal world is you never have to raise funding, right? Yet funding is seen as a metric of success. So we probably we spent all this money building the Swish mobile app, hiring a team, putting money in marketing, and it wasn't until we were running out of cash towards the end of 2014, when we started speaking to investors about the next round, and I started looking at the numbers, and we were like, something is really wrong here, right? like another bullshit metric, but Stephen Fry had like downloaded the app and tweeted about it. Or I emailed him and he agreed to tweet about it. So we had like loads of downloads, right? Tens of thousands of downloads and virtually no transactions. Like no one was buying, right? So something was fundamentally wrong, but we didn't quite realize that till the end of 2014. We went out to raise money for the Street Hub business. And I remember the Street Hub concept. And I remember everyone going like, oh, why... like, what's your revenue? I was like, what a stupid question. What do you mean revenue, right? Like, look at this cool app, right? Look at it, like, we've been on TV, right? You know? It's like, I didn't understand the question. And at first I was like, these guys just don't get it. You know, if I was in the Valley, people would be throwing money at me. And over time, you're like, oh, hang on, these are like pretty good questions, right? Like, how much have you spent on marketing? Like 100 grand. How much you made in revenue? Like, nothing. Okay. Something that this math doesn't work, right? You're like, oh, yeah. So we actually managed to get Index, Local Globe and Octopus, so 3 VCs basically, to give us more money on the basis that we had executed the plan correctly. It's just that it was the wrong plan, right? And it wasn't until we closed, and we were very lucky. It was very painful. We went within like, I think it was in 3 days of just like shutting down the business when Octopus stepped up and said they'd lead the second round. So it wasn't until we closed a bit, so we closed another $2.5 million, right? And it wasn't actually till we had the funding that we took a step back and went to do what we should have done, which is speak to our customers and figure out what they really wanted. And that's how we came up with Trouva.
I think I've heard this story a few times from different people about when they raise too big of a pre-seed, it can actually really hold you back, because then, like you said, then you don't do the thing about proving the customers and talking to that. You're like, oh, I got the money, I'll just go and build it. And then it causes problems later on. And it's interesting because we're talking about this now, and I wonder how many people listening who can be like, oh yeah, but I'm still going to raise a big round. And it's like, it's that whole thing of where...
Yeah, and the funny thing is that...
pain, right?
I mean, these numbers are relevant nowadays, right? You know, like raising, whatever it was, you know, like $3-4 million at seed funding. But at the time, I think was one of Europe's best funded seed investments. So the number now to make equivalent would be 20 or 30, right? And if someone offered me $20-30 million in a pre-seed investment, I probably would still take it. Right? Like, it's like crazy to say no to capital, right? And it's against like your DNA as a founder. But I think what I would have done, best advice I ever got that never managed to follow, was raise as much money as I could and spend half of it. I would have acted as if I had less capital, right?
Yeah.
And it's virtually impossible to do, right? Because the minute you've got more capital, you want to hire more people, you're always busy. You want, like, you know, people want pay rises. You think, oh, hang on, I can hire this really senior person, not this junior person. And, but it's crucial for two reasons. One, like, you think, if I had less cash, how would I prove this sooner rather than later? How would I prove it in 3 months, not a year? And secondly, finding product market fit is the hardest thing about a startup. And it's the bit that can take 2 days or it can take 20 years, right?
Yeah.
No one really persists for 20 years, but you could, right? In some businesses. And so where you get in trouble is if you run out of cash along the way. So the benefit of like having money in the background would be like when we needed that extra cash a second time to being able to tap our reserves, that would have been really valuable, right? And buy ourselves extra months, extra runway. So weirdly enough, it wasn't necessarily, it was the way we acted with the cash, but it's not the cash per se, right? I think I could have, so as a second time founder, if I was to do it again, I'd like to think, who knows, I'd like to think that I'd be able to act in a lean way and kind of almost lock up half the money, right? And just not even touch it. And that would be the ideal, right?
So obviously now building Trouva as the new idea, can you tell us like where did that end up? So that journey so you've pivoted to Trouva, and obviously Trouva was massive success over time. What happened there? What was the story of Trouva?
Yeah, so I'll touch a little bit just on the beginning story, but essentially this mobile app had loads and loads of users and downloads. But essentially, if you were nearby the store, and in hindsight, this is obvious, you would just go into the store, right? So we had people going into the store and just picking the items up there. We did some really, like doing a 10-minute delivery in 2014 got us on the front, or like got us in the Evening Standard about how we're taking on Amazon. But it turns out like no one cares about getting a Tom Dixon lamp in 10 minutes, right? You know, I'm not even sure anyone needs grocery in 10 minutes, let alone homewares and fashion. But what we did have when we were talking to our customers is that we ran the Sean Ellis product market fit survey. And we had actually a massive vocal, not even minority, majority of customers who hated us, like absolutely hated us. And weirdly enough, those are the customers we went after. Because when we spoke to them, the reason they hated us was because they said, hey, I found this really cool product on your app. Or I saw it on BBC. I saw it on the BBC. So I downloaded your app and I'm in Manchester. And I found this amazing, like, lamp or vase or bag in the shop in Shoreditch. And I can't get to the shop. And why can't you deliver it to me, right? And then I went online and looked for this product and I couldn't find it on Amazon. I couldn't find it on ASOS. And I'd just do anything to get this product and you won't sell it to me. And in hindsight, it really was that obvious that we just weren't spending enough time listening to our customers. So we actually focused on our detractors. We went after those guys and we actually built a more traditional marketplace where it was a website. We could still see these beautiful curated home and fashion products from the coolest independent stores, but get them delivered to you. It took us a couple of months to figure that out, a couple of months to build it. And we launched that in Q3 2015, so towards the end of then. And there's a real lesson there in how you don't really realize you don't have product market fit until you do.
Yeah.
With Street Hub, everything was painful. Like everything was tough, right? Like just even getting like people to buy. I remember giving out free vouchers at Christmas and people still wouldn't buy, right? Stephen Fry, ironically, he'd emailed me and said, like, I can't be bothered traipsing around 8 stores to pick up all these products. And like, I think we sent the team around to go pick it up for him. But, like most people can't be bothered either, right? So it was really hard work. And then we launched Trouva and it really did like take off almost straight away. I wouldn't say it was an overnight success because the reality is it was like a 2-year overnight success in the making. But I remember like the first month, these are rough numbers, we did 100 orders, right? Which was our record on Street Hub. Second month we did like 200. Third month, it was 400. And we were doubling month on month, right? And we went into Christmas and we were doing thousands of orders in the first few months of launching. So that's, in a way, that was like amazing. And we went from like $0 million of GMV to $40 million run rate in 3.5 years. I remember we were the second fastest growing business in the UK, apparently tech business. I mean, it was a lot more fun, but it just brought different problems, right? That first Christmas, I was doing customer service myself, right? And these independents just couldn't cope, right? People were calling up saying their items hadn't been sent by the shops because they couldn't handle logistics. So that's when we had to go solve all the problems of lack of scale. But I think there was a much more fun problems to have in hindsight. Yeah.
And like, as that journey scaled on, right? So you said the different problems you have to solve there. How did that evolve for you? So obviously, eventually Trouva exited. How was that journey towards the latter half of where you're now gearing up towards exit and I guess letting go of that baby? Yeah.
So I was the CEO from, I guess, 2013 to end of 2019. So that was until after the Series B. Then I moved to Non-Exec and then Alex, who took over from me, he sold the business in 2022. So I was on the board till the exit. But my personal journey was more about going from that, like finding product market fit, raising the first money to actually, I don't know, we were 120 people or something about it at the time. Step back, we raised another 40 million-ish of funding. And, it was a very different job as a founder, right? Having to build a senior team and actually that was harder for me.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that like day-to-day kind of grubby work, right? Yeah. Even if I'm romanticizing a bit, standing on the street, giving out flyers in the rain while everyone's telling you to F off on a Friday night. And all of a sudden, and ironically, one of the reasons I left private equity is because I wanted to build. And the irony is you get more successful, you kind of step away from that again, right? So by the end of my time there, my job was hiring, raising enough money so the team could get on with it, and then setting the strategy, right? I did more than that, but that's probably that's all I should have done, right? And that for me was a harder transition. And I think a lot of founders like micromanage, right? Because they find that transition really hard. Yeah. So definitely the hardest bit of getting out of the weeds, right? And trusting other people, right? To do it for you. And then, I guess once you stepped into that non-exec role, where did you spend your time? Where did you start? Where did you decide, okay, now this is where I want to spend my time, or this is where I'm more interested in? Obviously, I know you do investing and advising. How did that all come about? Yeah, it was somewhat organic. So I think I actually, it wasn't publicly disclosed, but I think I quit or tried to hand in my notice anyway, September 2019, just as essentially we'd closed the Series B. My wife had just given birth to our first kid, so we're going through like all personal stuff, changed my priorities a bit. I didn't actually get to fully leave for like a year, so I had to do transition periods. So I was still full time for a while. That was the worst time, right? Still being full time in the business, but not being CEO. I didn't really have a job. Sounded great. I was still being paid, but I think I was trampling on Alex's toes. The team was still coming to me in some cases, and I wasn't moving on. By the time I did start to wind down, it was the COVID pandemic. So it was a forced transition. I was effectively at home looking after the baby, not being able to go in the office. I was dialing in a bit. And I was fortunate enough to have sold a chunk of my shares a couple of times on the way. So I had some savings, wasn't really doing anything, wasn't really spending any money. And I'd always loved helping out other founders. I mentioned, I'll give a shout out. I mentioned my mate had been through YC. So that was Tom Blomfield, who used to work with me at OC&C. And another mate had started co-founded Funding Circle.
So for the people who don't know, Tom Blomfield is obviously the Monzo founder, and he's done lots of other things too.
Right, yeah, and he's now a partner at Y Combinator. But at the time, he was one of the 3 co-founders of Go Cardless. So he'd helped me out a lot. Co-founded Funding Circle. James Meekings had been at OC&C, so he'd helped me out a lot. And a couple of others. So if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have got going. And because we were growing so fast and we'd raised relatively large amount of money for Europe at the time, we were pretty well known. So I'd get a lot of VCs introducing me to earlier entrepreneurs. And I love spending time with them and essentially sharing much more detailed, boring versions of the story I've given you, not really talking about, oh yeah, hey, we were growing 600% year on year and we raised like a $10 million round. No one wants to hear those stories, right? It was all the things I did wrong, basically, right? This is when I shouldn't have raised so much money. This is why I should have pivoted earlier. This is how I found product market fit. So, and a few of them had gone on to build like really valuable businesses. So essentially in 2020, I was doing that and had a bit more money. So I was like, oh, hey, I'll angel invest. So it kind of blended into one. I was like giving informal advice to founders who were earlier stage, and then this time putting some money in. And that was not really a job, still isn't a job, but that's what occupied my time. And then I also got approached by a few non-exec board roles. So I started doing a few non-exec board roles, a couple of startups. I joined the global board of Amnesty International as well. So that takes quite a lot of time. So I guess that's what's kept me busy. Yeah.
So I'm going to get to the Amnesty International bit in a second, but obviously you mentioned before about how when people look at your CVs, when you started the early version of the company, that they wouldn't necessarily realize your skills and your personality. So now when you're assessing startups to invest in or to advise, how do you go about that? Because obviously you're getting the same things everybody else gets. The pitch deck usually says X this, X that, X that. You don't really know what their personalities are until you have a good sit down and chat with them, which is not always possible.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question and one that I'm still grappling with. Funnily enough, it came up with a founder earlier today. They had a private equity background, and I used to get entrepreneurs assuming I'd be more sympathetic because of their private equity background. I'm almost like a self-hating PE consultant, right? Because I'm like, I knew nothing when I left, right? I hadn't really done anything in the real world. I hadn't managed people. I hadn't built anything. So I become somewhat skeptical of people like that. But it's a bit harsh because, like you say, it's figuring out the things behind that. So in fact, actually with this chap today, I asked him if he had ever broken the rules. There was an old Y Combinator question. The first question on the YC form, don't know if it still is, but it was back in the day, was that tell me about a time you've hacked the system. It's a brilliant question, right? And it doesn't mean literally have you hacked the computer, but like tell me a time, you've done something, you've gone outside the norm, right? Because you do have to think that way. And I think you have to have got something in your background that drives you, like some motivation's an important one, but also shows that you've got some evidence of being able to execute and build. My personal bugbear with VCs at the moment is that they less do that, actually. It's less, you've worked at Goldman's or whatever. It's almost a negative. But there is a kind of like, you've worked at Revolut, you've worked at XY, Stripe, you've worked at blah, 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 Unicorn. And that clearly can be a breeding ground for the best entrepreneurs. And in fact, even at Trouva, I think we've had 6 or 7 startups come out of that, right?
Yeah.
But just because you worked in mid-level at Stripe in Europe doesn't mean you're entrepreneurial material. So the same logic needs to be applied to people who've worked at, big tech, or even startups that become successful. And often it's the ones who were there very early on. They were there for that initial journey, or the culture is highly entrepreneurial at these places. And that, Revolut still has a notoriously entrepreneurial culture, right? For good or bad. So I think it's digging under the skin of it. But you're right. You can't speak to everyone. I think first thing is my learning experience is speak to more people than you think. Judging based on logos, right, is a really terrible idea. So try and speak to, even spending 20, 30 minutes speaking to a founder can be way more valuable than sitting there and looking at their LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And most people have time to do that. The second, and it's somewhat depressing, but I kind of get it, it is the validation of who knows someone, right? If someone says I work with this person, they were super smart, right? Or they're really great, then the logos are irrelevant, right? I'll have that conversation if it's someone I trust. Unfortunately, that does create the kind of tech ecosystem where getting an introduction makes you much more likely to be seen. But it kind of is rational, because otherwise there's 1,000,001 people with the same logos. And how do you know that unless you have time to speak to them all?
I find it really interesting. Somebody says ex-Google, for example, and they were there for 2 months in a summer internship.
Right.
And it's how does that prove that you're going to be more likely to make a unicorn or $1 billion company? It doesn't really show that. But then that might get them a foot in the door, which is really interesting, because people say X this without actually giving any more detail about that. And you've invested quite a few startups now. Isn't it that you feel you took a chance on somebody maybe other people didn't see, and then you feel really validated now because they have gone on to do very well, and you thought you spotted them well early?
Yeah, and listen, define doing well, right? Because I mentioned before, even though Trouva sold, right, we were more highly valued, between us after our Series B, right? Yeah. So most startups don't even sell at all, right? So, if I look at current revenue or current valuation, there's definitely a few. I mean, 11X is definitely one that jumps out. It's founded by Hassan. Hassan's this chap who originally moved here from Syria, and he did go work at McKinsey, right? So you could look at the logo, but actually it was his hustle, his drive, right? I kind of backed him. They actually, that was a pivot, by the way, not particularly well known. That was started as a different business. 2 original founders, one of the founders left. Hassan pivoted the business. And I think what's public is that he launched 9 months ago. He's now at $10 million of ARR, right? It's certainly one of the fastest growing.
Yeah,
I've seen, right? Not quite whiz, but not far off. And so it resonates with that story. It's backing the founder and them and their hustle and drive, right? Rather than looking even necessarily at the business, right? Let alone the logos on their CV.
So just before we go to quick fire questions, I know we're a bit over time now. So you mentioned Amnesty International. How did that come about, and what do you do there?
So I'm on the international board there. So there's 7 of us who sit on who are the board of the international arm of Amnesty, and then there's 60, 70 constituent country sections, as we call it. How was that? I was when I was stepping back from Trouva, as I say, I was starting getting approached by quite a few non-exec boards. I did do a startup board. I'm still on the board of Trouva. I got approached by quite a few. I got approached by FTSE board, by headhunter for a FTSE 100 board, which probably would have been less stressful and more pay. But my parents were actually originally refugees from Burma, and maybe that's why. But I'd always been kind of obsessed with the refugee rights. I joined Amnesty as a member. So when I heard that they were doing an external call for candidates, looking for people with non-human rights backgrounds to join the international board, I was like, that's my dream, non-exec role. Took 6 months, had to go through an entire process and election. But the point was that actually they were looking for people who are interested in human rights, but not from a human rights background, so people from a business background, commercial background. And ultimately, it's a £350 million turnover organisation. So it's a serious, and it's actually technically a limited company. So it's serious business, even though it's not a business, it's an NGO. Yeah.
So how's that experience been? What impact do you feel like you've made?
Yeah, it's been a complete culture shock, right? People talk about this in the NGO space quite a lot. And my term's wrapping up pretty soon, so I can probably say a bit more after that. I think what is kind of been both a way to add value, but also made it so difficult, is that things that would seem very obvious coming from the commercial world, right? That, how you manage people, right? And that, sometimes people need to be managed out, not necessarily kept in an organization, or that that measurement of metrics is like crucial. Those are like difficult concepts actually to a lot of people from that background, right? And so I've been like the one pushing for like, I've definitely focused more on like, okay, what's the KPIs? What about the finance? What about the people? How do you measure the NPS of the people who work here, right? I focus on culture and things like this. And historically, Amnesty has had like issues in those areas. So one of the other reasons that I'm motivated to do it was that whilst I'm fascinated about human rights, I'm no expert in that, but I thought I can bring my expertise of things I've picked up as a CEO in the commercial world that would add value to an organization like Amnesty. So those are the things I focused on. I've been recruitment, finance and audit committee, all these kind of very fun things. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting because I would love to learn more about that as well off camera, I guess. So got us guys in quick fire questions now because we're quite a lot over time.
Nice.
So first one is, who are 3 British Asians you think are doing incredible work and you'd love to shout them out?
So I guess I'll pick on tech just because I know it better. So Ria Grover at Sequence is one of my angel investments. She's raised a big round from Andreessen Horowitz in fintech. Serial entrepreneur though, previously sold her company. I think she's brilliant. It's not easy being like a sole founder, right? Especially when you've got a family. So I think she's doing an awesome job. A real hustler. In the investment side, I think you've already had him, but I'll still give a shout to Reece Chowdhury at Concept Ventures, doing an amazing job, like positioning themselves as like being the home of UK pre-seed, and there's not enough investors who back founders early. So. And then I'll pick on a founder who hasn't raised venture money. So Parunji Uppal, who's CEO of A&D Digital, which is essentially a network of development studios so they build tech for a lot of big companies. Amazing business. I think £140 million of revenue, last numbers publicly disclosed, and founded that himself. He's also a big supporter of British Asian entrepreneurs, runs something called the Punjabi Professionals Network. And he's been really helpful to me as well.
Awesome. And then if people want to find out more about you and your story, where should they go to?
Good question. I don't have a company, don't have a website. I guess LinkedIn. I've now made like 80 angel investments, so always looking for like great entrepreneurs, irrelevant of background, to back. Earlier the better, even if it's just for advice. So send me a LinkedIn, I guess, or a tweet.
And then is there anything that people could help you with right now that maybe someone listening could help you with?
So probably exactly that. So if you know great founders who are building, they want to raise money. I'm also a venture partner at Hoxton Ventures, and maybe it's with that hat on, but especially as an angel, that's where I get my energy. I get my energy from people who are thinking of starting things. Doesn't matter how early it is. So can't speak to everyone, like you say, but people who you think are great and either looking to raise money or just advice, that would help me.
Awesome. So thanks so much for coming on. Any final words? No,
thank you for having me. It's a great initiative. No, it's taken me a while to do it, so thank you for bugging me. And I'd recommend it to anyone.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.